March 1944. A narrow alley in Lyon, France. A man in a worn coat leans against a brick wall, waiting. Across the street, a known Gestapo informant exits a bakery, bread tucked under his arm. He has no idea these are his final moments. The man in the coat does not draw a pistol in any recognizable sense. Instead, he produces what appears to be a length of metal tubing, something a plumber might carry. He raises it casually, almost lazily. There's a soft cough, nothing more. The informant crumples to the wet cobblestones. A woman walking past assumes he has suffered a heart attack. A German patrol 3 doors away continues their conversation without pause. By the time anyone understands what has happened, the killer has vanished into the maze of Lyon's Old Town, the weapon already broken down into components indistinguishable from ordinary pipe fittings. The instrument of death was not a conventional pistol. It possessed no graceful curves, no polish with grips, no ornate engravings. It looked like refuse, like something discarded on a factory floor. Yet this homely British pipe will become the single most feared covert weapon in territories under Nazi occupation, and its legend would endure long after the war ended. Before we continue, if you find the story compelling, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who appreciates hidden history. Your support allows us to keep uncovering these forgotten chapters of the past. The genesis of this weapon lies not in a weapons factory, but in a fundamental problem of physics and human perception. When Winston Churchill ordered the Special Operations Executive to set Europe ablaze in 1940, he was demanding something that had never been done on such a scale. A shadow army of saboteurs, assassins, and resistance coordinators would operate behind enemy lines, striking at the German war machine from within. But this shadow army faced a problem that no amount of bravery could solve. How do you kill someone in the middle of an occupied city without dying yourself moments later? The mathematics of sound worked against every covert operative. A standard military pistol produces a report of approximately 160 decibels. This is not merely loud. It is a physical assault in the ears, a sound that carries through walls, around corners, across squares, and into the consciousness of every human being within a substantial radius. In a city under occupation, where German soldiers patrolled every major street, where informants lurked in every neighborhood, a single gunshot was effectively a suicide note. You might kill your target, but the sound would bring every enemy's soldier within hearing range converging on your position. Escape became nearly impossible. The Special Operations Executive examined every existing solution. Knives were effective but required physical contact, enormous skill, and a certain psychological disposition that not every agent possessed. Strangling devices like garrotes required even more intimate proximity and favorable circumstances. Poisons were unreliable, slow, and difficult to administer. Crossbows and air guns lacked lethal power at any useful range. Existing suppressed firearms reduced sound, but not nearly enough. The best suppressed pistols of the era still produce 115 to 130 decibels, which is approximately the volume of a thunderclap or a rock concert. Quieter than unsuppressed weapons, certainly, but still unmistakably the sound of a gunshot. Still loud enough to attract immediate attention. Still effectively a death sentence to the shooter in hostile urban environments. What SOE needed was something that existed only in theory. A weapon that could be fired in a room full of people without anyone recognizing the sound as gunfire. A weapon so quiet that even the person standing next to the victim might not understand what had happened until the body fell. The specification called for a sound signature below 80 decibels, roughly equivalent to normal street traffic. Most ballistic engineers considered this impossible. The task was assigned to a classified facility operating under the innocuous name of the Inter-Services Research Bureau. Station 9, located in the unremarkable town of Welwyn Garden City in Hertfordshire, appeared from the outside to be nothing more than a collection of workshops and offices. Behind its gates, some of the most creative military engineers in Britain were developing weapons that defy conventional thinking. The unit's mandate was simple: create tools for ungentlemanly warfare, devices that violated every traditional notion of how wars should be fought. The lead designer on what would become the Wellrod project was Major Hugh Reeves, though the full team roster remains classified decades later. What distinguished their approach was a willingness to abandon every assumption about what a firearm should look like and how it should function. They did not start with an existing weapon and attempt to quiet it. They started with the physics of sound and worked backward to create something entirely new. The acoustic signature of a gunshot originates from three distinct phenomena. First, the explosive release of propellant gases at the muzzle. When the bullet leaves the barrel, the high-pressure gases behind it expand rapidly into the atmosphere, creating a shock wave that human ears perceive as a loud bang. This is a primary source of noise in most firearms. Second, the supersonic crack of the bullet itself. When a projectile travels faster than the speed of sound, approximately 343 meters per second at sea level, it creates a miniature sonic boom that follows in its wake. This crack is distinct from the muzzle blast and cannot be eliminated by any muzzle device. Third, the mechanical action of the weapon. In semi-automatic and automatic firearms, the operating mechanism generates substantial noise as it cycles, ejecting spent cartridge cases, chambering new rounds, resetting triggers and hammers. Each of these sounds must be eliminated or reduced to achieve true acoustic stealth. The Wellrod team addressed each problem systematically. For the supersonic crack, the solution was elegant in its simplicity. They loaded 9mm parabellum cartridges with reduced propellant charges, bringing the muzzle velocity down from approximately 350 meters per second to around 290 meters per second. The bullets flew below the speed of sound, eliminating the sonic crack entirely. Some questioned whether the reduced velocity would compromise lethality, but at the intended engagement ranges of 5 to 25 meters, the subsonic projectile retained more than enough energy to kill reliably. For mechanical noise, they made a radical design decision. The Wellrod would be manually operated. Instead of a semi-automatic action, the weapon used a simple bolt mechanism worked by a knurled knob at the rear. After each shot, the operator would rotate and withdraw this knob to extract the spent cartridge case, then push it forward and rotate again to chamber the next round. This was unquestionably slower than a self-loading pistol. Rate of fire was limited to perhaps 2 aimed shots in 5 seconds, assuming the operator remained calm under pressure. But the trade-off was near total mechanical silence. There was no slide slamming back and forth, no extractor flicking brass casings through the air, no recoil spring snapping the action back into battery. Just the soft click of metal on metal as the bolt was worked. The suppression of muzzle gases represented the greatest engineering challenge. Conventional suppressors of the era used a series of baffles to slow and cool the propellant gases before they escaped to atmosphere. The problem was efficiency. To achieve meaningful sound reduction, you needed many baffles spread across considerable length. Attaching such a device to a pistol created an unwieldy package difficult to conceal. The Wellrod designers solved this by making the suppressor the weapon itself. Instead of a pistol with suppressor attached, they created a suppressor with a pistol mechanism embedded within it. The entire forward 2/3 of the Wellrod consisted of an integrated suppression system. 17-wire mesh discs filled with rubber wipes created a labyrinth through which the propellant gases had to travel. Each disc absorbed energy from the expanding gases, slowing them, cooling them, reducing their pressure. By the time the gases finally vented the atmosphere through ports at the front of the weapon, they emerged as a gentle puff rather than an explosive blast. The results exceeded all expectations. Testing at Station 9 revealed a sound signature of approximately 73 decibels at the muzzle. This was not merely quiet for a firearm. This was genuinely quiet in absolute terms. 73 decibels is approximately the volume of a vacuum cleaner, a car driving past at moderate speed, or a normal conversation at close range. At 10 meters distance, the sound diminished further, becoming effectively inaudible against typical urban background noise. At 20 meters, it was nearly undetectable even in quiet conditions. The design had achieved what many considered impossible. The physical appearance of the Wellrod contributed to its covert utility. Overall length was just 310 millimeters, or approximately 12 inches. The barrel and suppressor assembly formed a cylinder roughly 32 millimeters in diameter. The grip was a simple rubber-covered tube containing a detachable magazine holding 6 rounds in early versions, later increased to 8. There was no trigger guard, just a small curved trigger protruding from the underside. Sights were minimal, a simple blade front and notch rear. Because precision marksmanship was neither expected nor relevant, the entire assembly looked like nothing more than a piece of industrial equipment, a length of pipe with some fixtures attached. A casual observer would never recognize it as a weapon. This utilitarian ugliness was intentional. SOE agents needed to carry the Wellrod through checkpoints, past patrols, through searches. A beautiful pistol with ivory grips would attract attention. A length of pipe might be overlooked, dismissed, ignored. Form followed function with ruthless practicality. Production commenced in late 1942 at an undisclosed location in England. The exact manufacturing figures remain classified even today, with estimates ranging from 2,800 to over 14,000 units. This remarkable variance reflects the extreme secrecy surrounding the program. Serial numbers were deliberately randomized to prevent anyone from estimating production quantities. Documentation was minimal, and much of what existed was destroyed after the war. The British government has never officially acknowledged the full scope of the Wellrod program. The weapon entered service in early 1943, distributed to SOE agents through clandestine supply drops across occupied Europe. It reached the French resistance, the Danish underground, Norwegian sabotage teams, and networks operating as far afield as Yugoslavia and Greece. Each unit came with a supply of subsonic ammunition and explicit instructions about its capabilities and limitations. The operational record of the Wellrod reads like a catalog of the Shadow War that ordinary histories rarely acknowledge. In France, the Maquis resistance used the weapon for targeted assassinations of German officers and collaborators whose activities had made them particular enemies of the underground. The weapon allowed killings in circumstances that would have been impossible with conventional firearms. One account describes a Maquis operative eliminating a Millis commander in a busy Lyon marketplace. The target fell without anyone in the crowd recognizing the sound of a weapon. The assassin walked away through confused bystanders, and the death was initially attributed to natural causes. Only the small entry wound, discovered later, revealed the truth. In Denmark, the resistance organization known as Holger Dansk conducted an extensive campaign against German occupation forces and their Danish collaborators. The Wellrod featured prominently in these operations. Danish resistors targeted Gestapo informants, Nazi party members, and Danes who betrayed their countrymen to the occupiers. The silence of the weapon allowed operations in residential neighborhoods, in cafes, in public spaces, where any conventional gunfire would have been immediately detected. One documented operation describes the elimination of a Danish police detective who had been passing information to the Gestapo. He was killed on a quiet residential street in Copenhagen during morning hours. Neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual. His body was discovered only when he failed to arrive at work. Norwegian resistance teams employed the Wellrod during sabotage operations against German military infrastructure. The weapon proved invaluable for neutralizing guards and sentries without alerting nearby forces. In one notable operation, a two-man SOE team used Wellrods to eliminate 3 guards at a communications facility before planning demolition charges. The absence of gunfire gave them critical minutes to complete their work and escape before the alarm was raised. Without the silent weapons, the operation would likely have failed before it properly began. The Wellrod also saw service in the Far East. British and Commonwealth special forces operating against Japanese occupation used the weapon in Burma, Malaya, and elsewhere. The same attributes that made it effective against Germans proved equally valuable against Japanese forces. One account describes the elimination of a Japanese officer at a checkpoint, allowing an entire patrol to pass through undetected. The psychological impact of the Wellrod extended beyond its immediate tactical utility. German and Japanese forces began to understand that silence offered no safety. The absence of gunfire did not mean the absence of danger. Officers who had felt secure walking the streets of occupied cities began to glance over their shoulders. Informants became harder to recruit when potential collaborators understood that betraying resistance could mean death without warning, without noise, without any chance to cry for help. The Wellrod weaponized uncertainty itself. Now, let us examine how the Wellrod compared to what other nations were developing during the same period. The Germans produced various suppressed weapons, but their design philosophy differed fundamentally. German suppressors were typically add-on devices intended primarily to reduce the acoustic signature of snipers, making it harder for enemy soldiers to locate the source of fire. The suppressed Walther PPK achieved approximately 115 decibels, a substantial reduction from the unsuppressed 160 decibels, but still clearly identifiable as a gunshot from considerable distance. German doctrine did not emphasize close-range assassination in the same way British irregular warfare thinking did. American efforts produced the high-standard HDM pistol, a suppressed .22 caliber weapon used by the Office of Strategic Services. This weapon achieved approximately 90 decibels, impressively quiet though not as silent as the Wellrod. More importantly, the .22 caliber projectile limited its effectiveness. The small, slow-moving bullet lacked the penetrating power and terminal effect of the 9mm round. Multiple shots were often required to ensure a kill, and the rounds struggled to penetrate heavy winter clothing. OSS operatives often preferred to use the HDM for sentry elimination, followed by a coup de grace with a knife, rather than trusting the diminutive round to accomplish the task alone. The Soviet Union developed the Bramit device, a suppressor system that could be attached to the Nagant M1895 revolver. This weapon had a unique advantage in that the Nagant's gas-sealed cylinder prevented sound leakage between the cylinder and barrel. However, the Bramit system was primarily intended for use by partisans and scouts rather than assassination specialists, and its sound signature remained considerably higher than the Wellrod. A direct comparison of acoustic performance illustrates the Wellrod's superiority for covert killing. The Wellrod achieved 73 decibels with a 9mm projectile, offering reliable lethality. The American HDM achieved 90 decibels with a .22 caliber projectile of limited stopping power. German suppressed pistols rarely achieve better than 115 decibels. In the grim mathematics of assassination, these differences translated directly into survival. An operative could fire a Wellrod in one room, while German soldiers occupied the next room, without alerting them. This was simply impossible with any competing design. The Wellrod's principal limitation was the finite lifespan of its suppression system. The rubber wipes that sealed around each bullet as it passed through the baffle stack degraded with every shot. After approximately 15 to 20 rounds, the wipes were sufficiently worn that the sound signature began to increase noticeably. After 30 or more rounds, the weapon lost much of its acoustic advantage. This was acceptable for its intended purpose. An SOE agent was not expected to engage in extended firefights. A single mission might require only 1 or 2 shots. A supply of replacement wipes allowed the suppressor to be refurbished in the field, though this required time and relative security. The bolt-action mechanism, while essential for acoustic stealth, imposed severe limitations on rate of fire and magazine capacity. An agent armed with a Wellrod could not suppress multiple enemies in rapid succession. The weapon was intended for single, carefully planned eliminations, not combat. Missing your first shot with a Wellrod was potentially fatal because there might not be time for a second before the target reacted or guards responded. The minimal sights and short effective range made the Wellrod ineffective beyond 25 meters. This was not a precision weapon. It was a murder tool designed for contact distance or across a small room. Agents were trained to get as close as possible before firing, ideally within arm's reach. At these distances, elaborate sights were unnecessary. The Wellrod continued in service long after the Second World War ended. British Special Forces retained the weapon through subsequent decades, valuing its unique capabilities for certain specialized applications. During the Troubles in Northern Ireland, there were persistent rumors that Wellrods or similar weapons were employed by clandestine security forces, though official confirmation has never been provided. The weapon's design was studied and influenced subsequent developments in suppressed firearms. Modern weapons have in some respects surpassed the Wellrod. Contemporary integral suppressors using advanced materials can achieve similar sound reduction while allowing semi-automatic operation. Polymer-framed pistols with modular suppressors are more versatile and ergonomic, but in its historical context, the Wellrod represented a breakthrough that fundamentally altered the possibilities of covert warfare. The engineers at Station 9 did more than design a quiet pistol. They created a weapon that redefined what assassination meant in occupied Europe. They gave resistance fighters a tool that allowed them to strike back against their oppressors in circumstances that would otherwise have been suicidal. They demonstrated that creative engineering could solve problems that conventional military thinking deemed impossible. Thousands of Wellrods were manufactured. Most have disappeared into classified disposal or private collections. A few survive in museums, their ugly utilitarian forms offering little hint of their deadly heritage. They look like scrap metal, like industrial refuse, like nothing of consequence. That was always the point. November 1942 through May 1945, across occupied Europe, German officers and their collaborators died without warning. Shots were fired without sound. Bodies fell in crowded streets where no one heard gunfire. A weapon that looked like a piece of pipe had become the most feared firearm in the Nazi Empire, not because of its power, not because of its range, not because of its precision, but because it offered something no other weapon could provide: true silence. The last silence that many of its victims ever knew. The Wellrod remains a testament to British ingenuity in the darkest days of the 20th century. It was ugly, crude, limited in a dozen ways. But it worked. It worked when elegant weapons could not. It worked when nothing else would. And in the shadow war fought in occupied cities from Copenhagen to Lyon, from Oslo to Belgrade, working quietly was the only thing that mattered.